This next challenge question involves method calling and tracing, and it's especially emphasizing the keeping track of references both to the this variable that will be set up during method calls and to parameters that are passed in. So I'm going to give you a minute to pause this, try working through this problem, and answering the questions on Gradescope before continuing on in the video and tracing through it and checking your work with mine. And then we'll work through this together in another few seconds. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set up my globals. And once again, the emphasis of these questions really isn't about global scope, so we're not seeing much happening in globals here. I'm going to set up my heap. We are going to have some objects here. If we just look at an overview of our code, we see that we've got a class named account that has a balance as a part of it. So maybe we're thinking about a bank account here. We've got a constructor that when a new account is set up, we're going to initialize its balance with the amount that constructor is called with. Then there's some methods. So there's a deposit method, a withdrawal method, and a transfer method. And there is a warning here that there might be some poorly named variables or methods, so we're going to have to trace this carefully. And then lastly, we see in main, we've got some code. So let's jump into main. So main occurs from the call on line 31. And there are no parameters in main, so we're ready to jump right in. And from within main, we see that we're setting up a new account for Alice. So we see that we're on the right-hand side of our assignment operator here, setting up a brand new account object. And so we're going to call the account constructor. And we've got an amount parameter that is 100, right? We have a return address of line 25. That's where we're going to come back to. And we know that we need to set up a this variable to refer to the new account object that we're constructing here. So account, and each account has a balance property that's a part of the object. And we haven't yet initialized it because that initialization takes place in the constructor, right? So we're ready to jump into this constructor, and we can see that the only thing this constructor is doing is initializing the balance. So this dot balance, so this dot balance is assigned whatever the amount parameter was. So this balance is established to be 100. And remember, when we reach the end of a constructor call, the return value from that constructor is the object that we're constructing. So we're returning a reference to this account, all right? And that gets returned to line 25, where the Alice variable is now established to refer to that account object as well. So now Alice has this account with a balance property of 100. Very similar thing happens for Bob's account, right? So we once again have another call to an account constructor. This time around, we've got an amount that's a little bit less. So Bob's initial amount is 50, right, for this constructor call. And our return address here is the line after the one we just finished. So that would be line 26 in main. We know that we are setting up the this variable to refer to a new account object. And this will be an account object whose balance is initially undefined, because it will be defined as a part of the call to the constructor, right? And so we're ready to jump into the constructor frame. Once again, we know that this is a very simple one-step thing. We're taking amount in this frame, so that's 50, and assigning it to this dot balance. So the balance of this particular account object on the heap will be 50. And when we reach the end of a constructor call, remember we have that implicit return. So the return value is going to be this object that we're setting up, right? And so that gets returned back to line 26. And on line 26, we now have Bob in main is referring to this account object whose balance is 50, all right? So now we've initialized these two variables, and on line 27, we reach a method call. And here we're gonna need to be very careful with how we process this method call. How do we know that we've reached a method call? We see some object or variable name followed by a dot, and then what looks like a function call, right? But we know that that's a method call. We're saying, hey, Alice, I'm calling your transfer method. And for the amount parameter, I'm passing an argument of 25. And for the to parameter, I'm passing a reference to Bob, right? So let's actually set that frame up. But first, before we do that, let's confirm Alice in main. Alice in main is an account object. So we can say, okay, account class, do you have a transfer method? And sure enough, there is a transfer method, and these parameters are corresponding to the arguments that we're trying to pass to it. Right? So we can set up a frame for account transfer. And we've got a few parameters to set up. So our amount that we're transferring is 25. And our to parameter is whatever Bob is in main. So Bob in main is a reference to the account with a balance of 50. So to in this transfer method call is going to be that account. And then we need to set up the this variable, right? And so this is going to be what object was this method call established on, or what object are we directing this method call at? And we're directing it at whatever Alice was in main. Well, Alice is a reference to the account with a balance of 100. So in this account transfer method call, this is going to also refer to the balance with an account 100, right? So to in this transfer method call will be the account with a balance of 50, and this will be the account with a balance of 100, right? And we needed to set up a return address. So the return address here would have been line 27. That's where this call occurred. And now we've established this frame. We're ready to jump into it, right? So we jump into the transfer method. And here we see an even more interesting expression, right? So this is a nested method call. And remember, because we're dealing with parenthetical expressions here, we need to work our way out. We know what value amount is. Amount in this frame is going to be 25, right? So when we do name resolution here, we can see amount is 25. So we need to process this method call to.withdraw and see what that returns, right? So we look at what is to. So to is an account, and it's the account whose balance is 50. And we look and see, does an account class have a withdrawal method? Sure enough, it does. So this is going to be the method we're calling. And this amount value is a number. It's a 25, and that matches up with the parameter, right? So it seems like this is a valid method call. So let's actually add a frame for it. So we're going to be calling the method on the account class named withdraw. And there's a parameter named amount that we're passing in. And that is going to be 25, right? And so where did that 25 come from? Remember, this argument here was from within the transfer method call. So we're talking about this frame here. What is amount in this frame? Well, that amount was 25. And so we're passing that to the amount parameter of this withdrawal call. And this is a method call, so we need to establish the this variable, right? And so this is whatever to was in account transfer, right? So this is going to be the account with balance 50, right? So here, the balance is, we've established a reference to the object whose balance is 50, and our return address, whatever this method call returns, is going to be line 20, right? When we come back with this withdrawal function, or this withdrawal method returns a number. So when we come back with a number, that's what this part of the expression will evaluate to, right? So we've set up our parameters, we've set up our this variable, we've set up our return address, our frame for this method call is ready to go. Okay. And so we jump in, and the first line of this method call is subtract from this dot balance. So this dot balance is this value 50 here. Subtract from this dot balance amount, that's 25, and reassign it back to itself. So balance now will be 50 minus 25, and then it will be reassigned back to itself. So it will just be 25, right? So we've subtracted amount from this dot balance, reassigned it back to itself. And then we're saying return the amount that we just subtracted from this account balance. So we're returning a value of 25. right? And where are we returning that 25 to? Well, back to line 20. That's our return address. So we're sending it back to line 20. And this method call now is going to evaluate to that return value of 25, right? And so now we have a little bit more work to do. Now we can process this outer method call where we're trying to call this.deposit, and 25 is going to be the argument that we pass to the amount parameter of the deposit method. All right, so we need to see if this is a valid call. So first we need to know what frame are we in? Well, we're in this frame, right? We're back in account transfer. We haven't finished working on this transfer method yet. So this is the account whose balance is 100. And we're saying we want to call the deposit method on this account object. So sure enough, we can check the deposit method's here. We're passing 25 to that deposit method's amount parameter, and we'll be able to jump right in. All right, so let's set up a frame to work through this deposit method call. So account, I apologize for how small this is getting at the bottom as I run out of space here, deposit. And the amount that we're depositing is 25, right? That's what we had evaluated the to.withdrawal method to be, so 25. And the this parameter is whatever we call that method on. So that method was called on this in account.transfer, right? So account transfer frames, this was the balance, the account whose balance was 100. So I'm going to set up another arrow to the account whose balance is 100. And that's what this will be for this deposit method call. And the return address is going to be line 20 once again. And so we jump in, right? So what is this? What do we do in this deposit method? So we're up here in this deposit method and we're saying take our amount, that's 25, add it to this dot balance, that's 100, and reassign that back to this dot balance. So balance of this account object is now going to be 125, right? So we've completed this line 11. We reached the end of a void method, right? So our return value here is void. So we go back to line 20. And on line 20, we're in the transfer frame here, right? And we've completed this whole line now. We withdrew from the account that was passed in by 2 and deposited that amount into the account that was set up as this for the transfer method. And so my return value here is going to be nothing. And that's the end of that void method call. So we're jumping back to line 27. So line 27 was here. So now that was a pretty long-winded process to evaluate this transfer method call, right? So the call to transfer first went to call withdrawal on one of those objects and then went to call deposit on the other of those objects, right? So now we're back in main, and on line 28, we print Alice.balance. So wow, we're all the way back up at the top of our stack in the main frame here, and we're saying look up Alice's balance. So Alice's balance was 125. So our output here would be 125, followed by Bob's balance. So Bob.balance would be 25. Okay. Now, if we just read this code and we read the names of these parameters, so we said Alice.transfer 25, and then this says to Bob. So it seems like we should have gone from Alice having 100 to 75 and Bob to having 75. But there's a slight logical error, or I shouldn't even say a logical error, but an implementation error that we kind of got these two things backwards. We probably should have said this dot withdrawal amount. So we could have written this as to.deposit. And what are we depositing? Well, we're withdrawing some amount from this account. So this dot withdraw is probably what we meant to do here, right? So we probably meant to withdraw some amount from this account and deposit it in the account we're trying to deposit to, right? So this would have been a correct implementation based on the names of these parameters. But here we were trying to debug a faulty implementation of transfer, and so that's why we wound up with the outcome that we did. Being able to trace references in this way and trace through method calls like we saw here is an important skill in understanding how object-oriented programming works in this unit.